podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the podcast from Roker Report, as we can finally stop talking about games that have zero consequence now, and we can also stop analysing and panicking every time a player goes to the floor with an apparent injury. Yes, we've been waiting since the beginning of March and the playoffs are finally here. And today I have two people who are likely to be sitting in close proximity during the game. And before you get excited and get ahead of yourselves thinking we have Regis Labrie and Frank Lampard, I will crack on and introduce our first guest. As always, we are very pleased to have a regular Roker Report contributor and probably more important, the BBC Radio Newcastle commentator, Nick Barnes. Hello, Nick.
Hello.
Hello. Are you well, that's the alarm. That's the alarm signal in the start of the playoffs, I think. I mean,
every time you mention my name, that goes off.
Yeah. Well, my nerves are already on edge, and that's not helping, you know. But well, just speaking of that, Nick, are you ready for all the nerves and the nail biting we've got ahead?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like you say, we've had this strange sort of period, as I said to Regis Labrie the other week, the sea of tranquility over the last month, where there was nothing to play for and everyone was in meltdown because they were losing, and everyone was getting sort of wound up that this was going to be no momentum and everything was going to fall apart. And finally, we've got something concrete. We've got jeopardy finally, which we've been looking for the past 4 or 5 matches, and I'm looking forward to it because I know from our colleague Scott Wilson off the Northern Echo was at Coventry on Saturday for the Borough game, and he said the atmosphere there was unbelievable. So I know Friday night it's going to be a fantastic atmosphere, and we'll finally get back to watching, football again, and as it should be over with something at stake, and nerves and everything that goes with it. It should be. I mean, it's going to be a crack in 2 legs. I think because it's Coventry as well, I think that's just added the sort of the juice to the mix, isn't it?
Well, that's a good segue, Nick, because I'm not sure where this conversation is going to help my nerves whatsoever. Because, well, more to the point, because our next guest is setting off alarms because he's so desperate to jump into the conversation. Because to discuss the ordeal from a Coventry City point of view, we are thrilled to have a lifelong Coventry City fan, and again, maybe more importantly, he is Nick's counterpart on BBC CWR, where he commentates week in, week out on the Sky Blues. We are very pleased to have Rob Gurney. Welcome, Rob.
Hello, Chris. Hi, Nick. Yeah, looking forward to it. It should be, as Nick says, a fantastic tie. I mean, obviously, for a long time, it looked as though we were going to be playing Sheffield United, because it looked as though we were going to finish 6th. But then Bristol City drawing with Preston, we overtook them in the table, finished 5th, which is a remarkable statistic in itself, really, considering some of the away performances, particularly in recent weeks. But yeah, it's going to be the old foes, Sunderland. Do we get 1977 out the way now, or leave it till a little bit later in the conversation? Because that always intrigues.
I've got that to come. Don't.
There's several generations of.
I've had so many people. There have been lots of conversations the last few days. I've had one only yesterday about Jimmy Hill. There's a whole raft of Sunderland fans who won't know who Jimmy Hill is.
No,
but have just jumped on the Jimmy Hill bandwagon. Like you said, a couple of generations. Yes, it means a lot to some older Sunderland fans and the injustice of it all and everything else. But the current, those people who grew up watching Sunderland from when they moved to the Stadium of Light and that generation, I think the Jimmy Hill thing is probably lost on them. But they just go with the flow, if you like. It's a strange sort of, it's bizarre, really. But it's there, isn't it? It's not going to go away. It's always in the background. It just adds to the mix.
Nearly 50 years ago now, which is incredible when you think about it. 1977. I mean, everybody knows the story. Obviously, Coventry and Bristol City played out a 2-2 draw. knowing that that would be sufficient for both of those teams to stay in the first division as it was then, and of course relegate Sunderland. And of course the staggered kick-off, which has always been blamed on Jimmy Hill, making sure that the kick-off at Highfield Road for the Coventry Bristol City match was staggered, which he always denied. He said it was due to traffic problems around Highfield Road at the time. But of course Sunderland had been beaten by Everton, I think, Nick, wasn't it, in the other match? And we stayed up along with Bristol City and basically played out to me, to you, kind of Chuckle Brothers routine for the last sort of 15, 20 minutes of that game, knowing that result would be sufficient. And Sunderland fans, like most football fans, have got elephantine memories for such things, and it's never been forgotten ever since. But that always brings, I think, even to this day, quite an edge to the respective fixtures, either up in your part of the world or down here. There always seems to be that sort of added edge to proceedings whenever the two teams' paths cross, as it were.
I mean, my biggest concern is the fact that Sunderland haven't won at Coventry for 40 years. I mean,
That's
you talk
right.
about that 50 years, but 40 years without a win. I know it's 12 matches, so it's in the greater scheme of things, it's not a huge number of matches, but 12 still not insignificant number of games not to have won, and 40 years over that stretch of time. That's it's not insignificant.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I think this is going to be my easiest interview ever. Just set you two off and just leave you for an hour. I think this is fantastic. But yeah, actually, just interesting on that. I just recently interviewed David Snowden, who's just written a book on that era of Sunderland, and he wrote all about that in the book. And a couple of things he mentioned during that game. I think Martin Hunter threatened someone when they were threatening the goal, and just told them just to to play nice and not play properly. And the other thing was, he said it shouldn't have mattered because he blamed Liverpool for fielding an understrength side when they were preparing for the European Cup. I think Bristol City got a result against them. But anyway, that's way back then.
At the moment, I mean, Coventry, I think they do have a bit of an Indian sign over Sunderland, because you go back a couple of seasons, that was that 5-4, that ridiculous 5-4 game at the Stadium of Light, which was almost like the manager's saying, right, in the first half, you do all the attacking. In the second half, you do all the attacking. And let's see how many goals we can score between us. And because Coventry, I mean, that first half of that game, they just went absolutely mad. I mean, it was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Wasn't it 9 different goal scorers,
Sunderland
Nick, as well, wasn't it? I think 9
Yeah,
different goal scorers.
it was phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. It actually sounds like a playoff game when you're describing it, actually. But
Well, yeah, it was a little bit like, I mean, that madness of the Inter Milan Barcelona
Yeah.
Yes.
Champions League semi-final. I mean, that's just extraordinary.
Well, look, we'll get back into this, but just because I've got two commentators on, I just wanted to quickly kind of pick your brains, because we've got these two big games coming up, and it's almost like historic moments. And I'll kind of put this one to you first, Rob, because it's something I've always wondered, because I go back to the famous commentary lines, like, Brian Moore when he's shouting, it's up for grabs now at Anfield. And, you've got Clive Tilsley commentating on the famous Manchester United comeback against Bayern Munich. I mean, are you conscious in the moment of these historic moments that your words are then linked to these huge moments when let's say it is a 5-4 and you're describing it and you come out with a line? Are you conscious that might kind of live on?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I don't know about Nick. I mean, I never script anything or don't try to. I think I have things in my head, that I'd like to bring out at significant moments, but I never write anything down, because I just think that, spoils the spontaneity of being a commentator. But I mean, two of my favourite memories are, going back into the 90s, actually, when Darren Huckabee scored against Manchester United in 1997 at Christmas. I remember, commentating vividly on that goal, and he basically ran half the length of the field, and it wasn't a vintage Manchester United team at that point. I mean, they still had the likes of Giggs and Beckham and Solskjaer and Sheringham. They were in the team, but it had like Kevin Pilkington in goal, with the greatest of respect to him at that point, and John Curtis at right back. But anyway, Huckabee ran half the length of the field, and it was just kind of built up to a crescendo. And then I think the final words I said were all the way through, chance for glory. And then, because we were 2-1 down going into the last few minutes of the game, and ended up winning 3-2, and he scored the winning goal. So that was a magnificent memory. And the other one was when Dion Dublin came back to Highfield Road as an Aston Villa player, having left under very controversial circumstances. And Robbie Keane was played. It was the one season where Robbie Keane played for Coventry before he went to Inter Milan. And he scored the winning goal. And famously, John Gregory or Doug Ellis wouldn't pay the extra £500,000 that Coventry did to get Robbie Keane from Wolves. So again, when Keane put the ball through David James's legs for what turned out to be the winning goal, I said, just again instinctively, "Are you watching Gregory?" Because John Gregory was the Villa manager at the time. And then, I mean, not as a result of hearing me, obviously, because it was bedlam in the ground, but then about 90 seconds later, the whole of the three sides of Highfield Road started chanting the same thing. So that's something that's always stuck in my mind as well. But yeah, I never try and script things. Like I say, I have things in my head, Chris, that I'd like to bring out at significant moments, but I never write them down, because I think that just, takes away, as I say, the spontaneity of the moment, really.
Yeah. You're the same, Nick, because obviously with Sunderland, you've got the fanzine that was called It's an Easy One for Norman, which was based on a commentary line, wasn't it?
I mean, I'm the same as Rob. I don't write anything down. I don't. My biggest fear, actually, in big games is I'm going to get a goal scorer wrong, or I'm going to mess up.
Yeah.
Oh, I had that innate sort of anxiety, if you like, that I'm just not going to get it right, or something's going to go wrong. It's horrible. I've been lucky so far. I mean, like Rob's talking about those standout moments. I mean, going that League Cup final of 2014 when Barini scored, great, and the Wickham playoff final, Ross Stewart and Elliot Embleton, and I hadn't scripted anything, and I listened back to those now, and I think, I probably got it about right, but nothing was written down, nothing's in my head. It's all spontaneous. You react to the. I don't know, Rob. I mean, because I've got Benno alongside of me. I've got strange. Benno works on a separate channel to me. He is watching. He is watching the game in his head. I'm watching the game in my head. And he is not listening to anything I'm saying. So you get this very strange sort of double commentary, if you like, when something happens. If you listen back to goals and things, Benno's off on channel X, I'm on channel Y, and the two somehow come together after 30 seconds or something. I'll say who the goal scorer was, and then 10 seconds later, Benno will go, yes, and he'll name the goal scorer, which I've already, But anyways, it's comic, really. I mean, how we manage it, I don't know, but so there's that strange dynamic going on at the same time as well. But I mean, these days, I'm always, there's that split second when I try and assimilate what's happened and who has scored without diving in and saying the wrong name. But I mean, invariably, I do get it wrong sometimes. That's just part of the job, I suppose. But I'm absolutely with Rob. I mean, look, I love some of the commentators on TV, and I know Peter Drury always gets hauled over the coals for all the lines he writes, and they are, they're witty, but I can't do that. I just, it's too cheesy for me. I just don't. Something I can do. I like the spontaneity. I like the game's good, and you're wrapped up in the game. It should come naturally anyway. I think you get your reaction should be spontaneous and natural and excited, and in that sense.
Yeah, and what I also try, and it never always works, but I always try and contextualise a goal as well, particularly if it's a significant one. Rather than just saying it's 1-0 and Hadji Wright or Ellis Sims or whatever it is. I try to give context, and Clive Eakin, I work with as well, who does the majority of the commentaries on BBC CWR as well. I mean, he's very good at doing that as well. We try and find a context to a goal, within a commentary, rather than, as I say, just saying it's Ellis Sims and 1-0. I mean, everyone knows that, but it's where that goal sits in the kind of the context of the season or the recent run of results or that kind of thing. I always think that's important for a listener to appreciate as well, really.
I've actually forgotten how to do a goal because we haven't scored any in the last. This is a bit of a fear for me.
Yeah, I'm inherently worried. I mean, as listeners on CWR will know, my glass isn't just half empty. It's kind of got the little dregs in the bottom often, because that's the sort of personality that I am. But all these kind of positive stats that point towards, us winning with a bit to spare, I say I inherently worry about all of that because, Sunderland obviously lost 5 on the trot. Everyone knows all the stats. Haji Wright got a hat trick a few weeks ago and whatever. And I'm just inherently worried that Sunderland are going to turn up and beat us 2 or 3-0 and make the second leg at the stadium of light somewhat of an irrelevance. Now, I hope that isn't the case, and it was a magnificent atmosphere against Middlesbrough for the last league game. It was a record attendance for a Coventry match at the CBS Arena, which is likely to be beaten again or very close to it for the first leg on Friday against Sunderland. So, and it's taken a long time. Obviously, people might be aware of the history of leaving Highfield Road, going to what was then the Ricoh Arena, now become the Coventry Building Society Arena. But then, historic disputes with the previous ownership of the football club and Coventry City Council, and then Wasps Rugby Club moved in. So we moved away twice to Sixfields in Northampton, first of all for a season, and then 2 seasons at St Andrews. And people yearning for the days of going back to Highfield Road when we owned the stadium, because obviously we're renting it now and have done for some considerable time. But in the last couple of seasons, and particularly in sort of recent months, it's felt the arena has felt more like home than it ever has done. It's just been, the atmosphere there is unreal when it's absolutely full, which it has been for quite a few games recently, and there is just this yearning to get back to the Premier League again. I was there at Villa Park in 2001 when Villa relegated us, although again that's technically not true because we would have gone down that day anyway, no matter what the result. We were 2-0 up. Mustafa Hadji scored both goals, lost 3-2 in the end, but it didn't matter because Malcolm Christie scored for Derby at Old Trafford against Manchester United. So whatever the result at Villa Park, we'd have been relegated that day in May 2001. But it's been 24 years. It's been such a painful journey to this point, losing Highfield Road, going to the Ricoh Arena, now CBS Arena, losing our financial stake in the stadium, say going away to Northampton and for 1 season, Birmingham for a couple of seasons, having Wasps Rugby Club moving up from High Wycombe as the landlords for a while. Then they went bust. So, and now Mike Ashley, of course, his familiar name to people in the Northeast. His Fraser's Group own the stadium now, and Doug King, the Coventry owner, chairman, owns the football club. So, there's still not a situation where the club and the ground are owned by the same person. But nevertheless, going back to my original point, the atmosphere now is incredible, and it does feel like home, for the first time in its 20-year existence, really, particularly over the last few months. It does feel like a really, excellent place to play football. But that has been, 18, 20 years in the making, really.
It's funny that. Sorry, Chris, I was going to say, every time I see Rob, there's a podcast on its own in this whole Coventry City story, because every time I see Rob, the first thing I ask is, what's the latest, Rob? Where are you playing next season? Where are you going to go?
He's already reminded us our bad run in Coventry stretches across 3 different stadiums, which I was really glad of. And the other, well, I mean, look, I mean, Nick, Rob got straight into the beginning and started with that slander that Sunderland fans, hold a grudge for almost half a century. But do you think this could be a good thing? Let's say let's compare it to maybe Bristol City, but couldn't we look at it as a positive thing that we got maybe a side that has a bit of an edge to it? I mean, because you maybe put Coventry in the same bracket as potentially Middlesbrough or Leeds. There's maybe that bracket of clubs below Newcastle for whatever reason. But do you think that's maybe a positive, that it does have that edge to it for Sunderland?
Yeah, I do think had it been Bristol City, and for a long time it looked like it was going to be, I think there would have been an air of not complacency, but I think the mindset would have been, it'd be okay. We'll roll these over and we'll be in the final. And I think that would have been a dangerous road to go down. I think with it being Coventry and with it having that edge, I think that will make a big difference psychologically to the players. I think one thing I was thinking about this last night and this morning. One thing that concerns me slightly is Frank Lampard is so experienced as a player in these occasions. He's been there with England, with Chelsea, with whoever. He knows exactly how to play these occasions. Whereas Régis Lebris, this is completely new to him. His sort of how he's mapping it out is by going back and watching Sunderland's playoff against Luton 2 years ago and trying to learn Sunderland's history in the playoffs. Whereas Frank Lampard's got bucket loads of experience of these occasions, and that to me is slightly. I'm a slight worry about that, because I think Frank Lampard might, that experience you can't buy that sort of experience, and that and he will have that sort of that's something he's got in his locker.
Yeah.
But I do think it's I'm in many ways, when people were talking about who you'd want to face and would you want to face Coventry, I was never one that felt that it was the wrong game to play, because I do think it's built up as a real. I think there's something. It's exciting. It's dynamic. It's got everything. It's potent. It's a fantastic playoff semi-final. Yeah. I mean, it would have been. If it had been the playoff final, it would have been, probably even worse. But it's. I think over two legs, I don't think Sunderland need to fear history or the fact they haven't beaten Coventry this season or they haven't won their 40 years. I think the two legs. I think that there are two games is an important factor in this particular semi-final.
Yeah. I mean, just on Frank Lampard, Rob, because obviously replacing fan favourite Mark Robins, which was controversial at the time. That was back in late November. Yeah. He went on a cracking run. Catapulted them into playoff contention and then confirmed the top 6 place on the last day of the season. But for a good few years, Coventry seemed to get off to a bad start of the season, then finish strongly. So they've done it again this season. How much is that down to what Lampard has done?
Yeah, I mean, I think, he has significantly improved individual players. You can tell that. I mean, Victor Thorpe, who's out injured, unfortunately, at the moment, is a prime example of that. I mean, he's an attacking midfielder, but under Mark Robins, he kind of hung back quite a lot, whereas under Lampard, he made those third man runs a lot during the second half of the season talk, and scored a couple of goals as a result of that. I mean, Jack Redoni has been unreal this season. It took him a little while to settle in, but certainly, his numbers for not just goals, but assists particularly are just, terrific. And he has been a wonderful signing from Huddersfield. And you can tell, I mean, Lampard is one of his heroes, so he gets to play in training, if you like, every day alongside one of his heroes, and I think they do have done a lot of individual work together. And if you are a midfielder at Coventry, you must be literally rubbing your hands, licking your lips, for training every day to go in knowing that you're going to be coached by, one of the greatest England midfielders of his generation. And that has been a significant, I mean, it was hugely controversial at the time. Normally when a manager gets sacked, it's been after a number of weeks or even months of fans grumbling and discontent, and they're happy to see the back of him. It was a unique situation in my entire career, really, where Mark Robins being sacked, there were some grumblings. It wasn't certainly universal that Doug King, the only chairman, had made the wrong decision, but there was certainly a great deal of animosity. And his first public appearance, Doug King, after the Robins sacking, was a fans forum that we were invited to host. So you could sense the hostility in the room towards him. And he basically, for the first 10 minutes of that forum, just spoke off the top of his head. He came in with one of these zip-up folders, but put it down on the desk and then never looked at it again for the entire time he was in the room, and basically threw Robins under the bus for the first 10 minutes of that forum, which went down very badly. I mean, one of the phrases that has come out throughout the season is top six deck. He kept referring to a top six deck, even though we were sort of in the bottom 4 or 5 at that point in the season. A little bit higher than that, but anyway. But now, of course, he's been proved right, and it's a top 5 deck that have ended up, having assembled. But there was a great deal of hostility in November when we did that fans forum towards him. And everybody thought, Lampard was a vanity appointment because of who he was, and all that kind of thing. But that has proved to be, exactly the right decision. He's taken 35 points at home, I noticed, since he's taken over, Frank Lampard, and only Leeds and Bristol City with 36 points have taken more points over that equivalent period of time than Coventry have under Lampard. I mean, Matt Grimes has been a really good signing as well during January. He was one of the members of the squad that wasn't in the original top 6 deck, if you like, in the early part of the season, because he came from Swansea in January. And again, he's a midfielder, so he gets to appreciate what Lampard's all about. And I think he has brought another dimension to Coventry's play in midfield. Simply because he not necessarily, he's not one for pinging a 60, 70 diagonal left and right. He does all the kind of the unseen, the dirty work, if you like, in midfield of kind of trying to generate attacks and picking up the loose balls and playing the little short passes and always wanting to receive it, even if he's under pressure. He always wants to receive the ball. So Grimes has been a terrific signing during January to complement Radoni, and Ben Sheaf has had a very sort of patchy season injury-wise, but he has come into his own a little bit more in the closing weeks of the season. But Lampard, I mean, again, I was one of the sceptics when Robins was sacked, particularly when Lampard took over. But I've been forced to eat my words about the appointment as well. And if he does take us that next step and brings Premier League football back to the club for the first time in 24 years, then it will be an absolutely inspirational appointment by the chairman.
Yeah, that's it. On his counterpart, Nick, Regis Labrie, he, for so long, he was so reserved and cagey in front of the media. And then suddenly in this last few weeks, he's almost started to box himself into corners by, making statements like saying we're going to step it up ahead of the Oxford game. And then that didn't happen. And then they went away to Portugal. And then he said, right, we've come back and we're raring to go now for QPR and then going into the playoffs. And then that backfired again when it turned out we weren't. I mean, have you been surprised that he's come out with those bold statements?
A little bit. Regis is generally quite reserved, if you like. He's not. He doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low, and you can generally, I think, through the season, predict what he's going to say to questions. He's not going to give. Rarely does he give too much away, and he certainly wouldn't give anything away, or he tries not to give anything away in terms of what the team's going to be or who's going to play. Though you can generally guess what he's going to do because he's a little bit conservative with a small C in the way that he's set the team up through the season. But I think he, like you say, he boxed himself into a bit of a corner because of the results not going as everybody had hoped they would go in this last few games, because everybody's been crying out for some sort of momentum, and that just wasn't happening. So of course that it immediately that puts the coach on the back foot, because he's got to try and defend what he's been planning or what he's been trying to do over the last month. And I can see, I think we can all see what he has been trying to do, but it perhaps hasn't gone as smoothly as he thought it may well have done. And I think there is a bit of a fear about this flicking the switch moment, that he's always referred to the semi-finals as being a completely different dynamic to the league games. And you can, there's no fears about flicking that switch and the players will turn up on the day. To a certain extent, I can accept that. I mean, the Queen's Park Rangers fan emailed me last week and was saying about Queen's Park Rangers in 2014-15, I think it was, we're in exactly the same position that Sunderland have been in, fourth in the table for months on end, weren't going to get second place, they weren't going to drop to seventh. And as this Queen's Park Rangers fan described the way the team was playing as dog chocolate, they won, I think, 4 games out of 20, and everyone feared the worst. And they went and won the semi-finals and scored a last-minute winner in the final. So, there are numerous ways of looking at it, and what's right, what is wrong, nobody really knows until they kick a ball on Friday night. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. I mean, Rob talks about Frank Lampard and what a coup it would be, the sort of him coming in and being who he is, and if he takes Coventry up. When in the same breath, Régis Lebris has come from nowhere, nobody knew anything about him. He's come from France, and if he was to take Sunderland up at the first attempt, that likewise would be a fairy tale story. So there's 2 sort of fairy tales going on, if you like, in association with the semi-final as well. The other one for me is Ben Wilson, because I've known Ben for years, and he messaged me the other night. Actually, I mean, he's really looking forward to Friday night. But for Ben, I mean, what a fairy tale for him in a way. And I actually really felt for him when Coventry lost the playoff final the other season, because I thought that was probably, I was thinking then, was that Ben's last big chance to play in the Premier League? Was that his big opportunity? Has it now gone? But of course, Ben will be looking at this. I mean, diehard Sunderland fan, don't get me wrong, but he will be looking at it from his own personal point of view as well, that this is a huge game for Ben. And I think on the back of the Middlesbrough game, when I understand he had an absolute blinder,
yes,
I'm assuming Rob he'll play on Friday night.
Yeah, no, he definitely will. I mean, he's a massive character. I mean, we've had a huge goalkeeping issue through the course of the season, really. I mean, Oliver Dovin was the Swedish international that we signed in the summer. Only 22 years of age. He started the season in goal, was a little bit patchy. Got injured in training, lost his place to Brad Collins. Brad Collins' first game actually this season was at the Stadium of Light in November in the 2-2 draw. And then he had an absolute shocker, Collins, at Portsmouth just before Christmas. We lost 4-1. He had a personal nightmare. He wasn't alone, although you could point the finger at him for quite a few of the goals. Dovin came back in then from Boxing Day onwards, and then got injured, did his knee ligaments at Sheffield United at Bramall Lane in March. And Ben had been out with a knee problem himself. But Frank Lampard had been very positive about him, talking about what a great influence in the dressing room he is because of his larger than life character. He's hugely charismatic, as we know. But Brad Collins came on at Bramall Lane and then kept his place. But it's kind of at Plymouth, when we lost 3-1, again, he didn't have a particularly good day personally. Did do well at Luton, but then, as people have probably seen the pictures, he was at least in part, if not almost totally responsible for the Luton goal in the last minute. So that was a huge call by Lampard to bring Ben back for the Middlesbrough game, but it paid off. He made some really good saves. I mean, the one from Azaz onto the post when it was still 0-0 was a terrific stop. And I think it's all been speculation really, but I don't think he's been necessarily 110% confident with his knee, which is what he injured in October. And Lampard said afterwards that he'd only been properly fit for a week or two before the Middlesbrough game. And he said, I mean, he'd have sort of seen the interviews or seen the quotes about how nervous he was before the Middlesbrough game, Ben, saying, because it'd been first game since October, about how he, wanted to go out there and do the best he could. And he definitely did. So that's worked out really well. I just hope that, he keeps his emotions and his adrenaline under control, because these are two massive matches for him. As you say, he's a born and bred Sunderland fan, and he'll be wanting to desperately, get Coventry to the playoff final at Sunderland's expense. And I just hope he can kind of keep those emotions in check, and channel it all in the right way to, if he needs to make some big saves, then make some big saves, rather than, again, it's very specialised position, obviously, goalkeeper, and it's unfair in some respects, because if you're a goalkeeper that makes a mistake, unlike one of the outfield players, a good 80-90% of the time it'll lead to a goal. So I just hope that, he doesn't have a rush of blood and, tries to come, to the edge of his penalty area and drops the ball, something like that, and it costs, because he is, as Nick knows, and you probably know, Chris, as well, he's such a massively, likeable fella. He spent virtually his entire career elsewhere as a number two goalkeeper. He's played 100 games for Coventry now, but he's 32, going on 33. But for the entirety of the rest of his career prior to joining Coventry, he was a number two goalkeeper. So for his crowning glory, if you like, to help Coventry to get into the Premier League would just again be a magnificent story. He obviously scored at Ewood Park. People remember that, against Blackburn.
Yeah.
All the Blackburn fans claimed it was handball, but it never was. In a couple of seasons ago, when we got to the playoff final and obviously lost on penalties to Luton. So, there's the Lampard stories, the Ben Wilson story. There are so many kind of narratives around this semi-final in particular. Like Nick says, I'm absolutely licking my lips in anticipation of it. I just think that, again, selfishly, I'd like us to almost be out of sight going to the Stadium of Light for the second leg, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it will be quite a tight game. Although Tony Brown, I used to do a lot of West Brom games with, his legendary former player, record appearance maker and goal scorer. One of the things that's resonated most with him is, for me with him, is he always used to say, you can't switch form on and off like a tap. You can't turn it on and off like a tap. And that's always resonated with me. And the fact that Sunderland have lost 5 matches on the trot going into the playoffs, I know it's a completely different phase of the season, it's a clean slate almost, but that does give me some optimism that the momentum is possibly with us now. But I still take absolutely nothing for granted. I've been following football far too long to think that it's going to be anything other than a drama-laden 180 minutes, and who knows, it might be even longer than that, Nick. Ultimately, before we
well, we're dreading it going to penalties because nobody can score them. But so that's another factor that's in play here as well. Just going back to Ben as well, just a little story. 16, 17 years ago, Ben was an apprentice at Sunderland, and I still got a slip of paper with the names of about 12 players on. Ben was one of them who I was giving media training to. I had to go in and talk to these 16-year-old lads at the academy who weren't interested at all in any media training. And there's that piece of paper, Ben's name still on it from all that. That's how I know Ben. We go back to that particular time. And then, as you say, his whole career he's had a good career. He's made a career of a journeyman career, if you like. So this really is sort of his big opportunity now. So I wish him all the best after Tuesday.
Yeah. But potentially we've lost Rob because he was doing it in the car park because he's just welcomed. He just had the birth of his baby daughter in the last couple of days, so he might have had to dash, or we might have lost him one way or another. But we'll carry on, Nick, because I do have do have more questions for yourself on Sunderland more than anything else. But we were talking about, obviously, look, we were talking about the mood of things. Rob's been talking about Frank Lampard. I mean, the psychological aspect from a Sunderland point of view, I find it really strange and difficult to get my head around because, you look, on the face of it, we've had an absolutely fantastic season, finishing fourth, chasing the top three for a long time. But it feels almost like we'd have been better off in terms of mentality going into the playoffs if we'd actually had a worse season and then managed to, jump into that top 6 place on the final day. And then, it's just that strange kind of that we'll finish fourth with a really good points total, maybe not what people were expecting. I mean, just on that, should we remember more about that and should we feel more upbeat about our chances? Now, are you surprised how flat people are about the whole thing?
I'm not surprised because, you can't escape the fact that the last 4 or 5 games have been poor. In fact, you can probably go back further than that. They've not been playing their best football. I think, there are lots of factors. I think the Mundle injury this season has been crucial. I think not being able to get Lefay playing in the position that they wanted to get him to play. Isidore's form, his goal scoring has dropped off a cliff. So there's 1 or 2 factors that all lead into this sort of general malaise, if you like, over the last couple of months. And that is naturally a worry. I think, Rob was referring to Tony Brown talking about, flicking that switch, and Benno's the same, and John Anderson says the same as well. So I completely understand those fears, and they are absolutely natural, and you wouldn't expect anybody not to worry on that respect. I'm a bit surprised this season by the number of fans that have said that if they don't beat Coventry or they don't go up, the season's a failure. Because I think to finish fourth this season with 3 Premier League clubs basically above you, with the average age of this group and where they finished last season, for a new manager from France to come in and achieve what Régis Debris has achieved this season, albeit the last couple of months haven't been great, is still an achievement. In isolation, I mean, Rob referred to Coventry finishing 5th. That is an achievement for Frank Lampard. You've got to see 4th an achievement for Régis Debris with a team that's as young as Sunderland is. So that sort of jars with me a little bit, because I do think, one way or another, however this season finishes, it has to be a successful season, just by dint of finishing in the playoffs. And I think the other thing is that in terms of would we have wanted more jeopardy in these last 5-6 games, I think Régis Debris is probably right in looking back at that season when they played Luton, when they limped into that playoff with injuries, with Lyndon Gooch playing as a centre-back, with players coming back too soon from injury. And I think that has definitely coloured his perception of how they should approach the playoff. And now, bizarrely, incredibly really, we've got, going into the playoff semi-final, a fully fit squad. Even Niall Huggins is back training with the first team squad. So, remarkably, they're going to go into it with, almost a 100% squad. And okay, you've got to say that Mundle and Ballard and Sirkin are coming back from injuries, and you've got to be careful there. And no doubt they'll be managed over the 2 games, which is understandable. But Régis Debris has put a plan in place, and from his point of view, it's come to fruition. He's going into 2 knockout games, if you like, with all his players fit and available.
Yeah. And it's great to see you back, Rob.
That's all right.
You disappeared for a couple of minutes.
Well, my phone said it was the temperature was too high. My phone needed to cool down, apparently, which is anyway.
Even your phone's feeling the nerves about Friday night. But Nick's just talking about the mentality of Sunderland going in, and obviously, we saw the celebrations at Coventry after they beat Middlesbrough. Yeah. Big celebrations. Frank Lampard was very upbeat. But just looking specifically at the first leg, obviously, the first leg being at Coventry. I noticed Coventry's away form hasn't been great, and they've lost 4 and drawn 1 of the last 5, going back to 1-0 win at Oxford on the 1st of March. I mean, is that going to be on their minds with that home leg? And do you expect Coventry, maybe for that reason, to come out the blocks and take the game to Sunderland?
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, I think that's exactly what will happen. I mean, I think it is a little bit too fanciful for us to expect, Haji Wright scoring a hat trick again, and us winning 3-0 has happened obviously in the league fixture, the regular league fixture a few weeks ago at the CBS Arena. But I think that we're all acutely aware, Frank Lampard and the players included, that our home form is far better than away. So I think the mindset has to be to try and take a healthy advantage, take the game to Sunderland in the first leg. I mean, don't go gung ho, because then if you obviously leave gaps, that's where Sunderland can potentially pick us off on the counter attack. But as the home side in the first leg, we have got to take the initiative and hope that Sunderland's drop off in form recently kind of plays into our hands. As I said earlier, the stadium won't be lacking for atmosphere. That is absolutely for definite. And it could be a game for the ages again on Friday night. Certainly, I'm hoping that is the case. And selfishly, again, I would like at least a couple of goals to take to Wearside for the return on Tuesday. But any sort of lead, I would be happy with. I think if it was by a couple of goals, I'd be even more confident. I mean, I suppose technically, I go back to the Middlesbrough game 2 years ago, the semi-final, where we drew 0-0 in the first leg of the semi-final at the CBS Arena again. And I felt quite deflated after that, because I thought, well, Middlesbrough are really good at home. And then we ended up going to the Riverside and winning 1-0 and getting to the final. So, it wouldn't be all over, clearly, if we didn't have a lead, or, heaven forbid, going there with a goal deficit. But I just think, as I said a few minutes ago, I think that it will potentially go the distance, unless we put the hammer down and manage to do what we did, a couple of months ago and get a healthy advantage. I mean, he's another dichotomy, really, an enigma, Haji Wright. He goes through a lot of games where you don't see him that much. He's not, that big an influence. Yet against Sunderland, he was just absolutely unplayable in the game a few weeks ago, where he got his hat trick. But he doesn't produce that form consistently enough, really, through the course of lots of games, over a prolonged period of time. Because if he did, then he'd be, a Haaland or a Salah replacement potentially at Man City or Liverpool. That's why he's playing for Coventry in the Championship, because he doesn't do that consistently enough. But on that day, as Nick will know, he was absolutely unplayable, and he is one of the key figures for us trying to take a healthy lead to the Stadium of Light for the second leg, definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, Rob mentioned game for the ages there, Nick. But in terms of Sunderland, I've got us trying to make it the opposite type of game, because in my head I'm looking at the fairly recent performances, like away to Norwich and West Brom, as kind of the blueprint for it, where we're organised, we're structured, and then, as Rob kind of touched on, aiming to catch them on the break. I mean, can you see anything else but that sort of plan?
Well, my fear is, I mean, Rob just mentioned it there, and how he would like Coventry to go to the second leg with a two goal lead or more. That is what I fear, because at the moment, Sunderland have not got goals. They've not got goals in the team at the moment. And so, what in the back of my mind, I'm sort of praying for is that 0-0 or sneaking a 1-0 win at Coventry, or even if they lose 1-0. But if they lose 2-0 or 3-0 to Coventry in the first leg, honestly, that for me could be curtains, because I just don't know where these goals are going to come from. And I think, so I'm assuming that Regis Lebris is mindful of that and is going to set the team up somehow, to try and you've almost got, as Rob said, this dichotomy of, do you go to Coventry and try and play attacking football and score goals, or do you go to Coventry and defend and try and take Coventry back to the Stadium of Light and hope the home advantage works in your favour back home? It's a really difficult one, because for me the difficulty does come from this final third and this issue that we've got Isidore and Meyenda, and at the moment Isidore, well, he hasn't scored since Leeds in February. Meyenda to me looks the more likely to score, but there's no guarantee with him. So who else is going to come with goals at the moment? There's nobody seemingly knocking on the door for Sunderland. They're not creating as they were earlier in the season. So for me, that's my anxiety. It sets it up nicely for Friday night. The atmosphere and everything else, but Frank Lampard will be more than aware that home advantage for Coventry on Friday night is potentially a tie winner, if you like. So it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Throw in the Ellis Sims factor as well. There's another former Sunderland connection. So there are so many narratives surrounding the game and how it might possibly go. And I agree with Rob earlier. I don't think it's going to be another 3-0 drubbing as it was because that day, I think Rob or Clive may have said to me, that was the best that Coventry played all season, and it was the worst that Sunderland played all season. It was the perfect storm. And so I don't see that scenario coming again, but it's very, very difficult to predict with the way that, because of Sunderland's form of late.
Yeah. And obviously, look, I'm not going to ask for predictions at all because I think it's silly with games like this. It's completely and it's utterly pointless. But I'll just put it to you, Rob, first. Yeah. We've been to and fro with the type of game. Are you expecting one of those playoff games that's all blood and thunder, 100 miles an hour, or you're expecting one of them cagey games when just nobody wants to make a mistake?
Yeah, it might be the latter. I think what is likely to happen is that the adrenaline rush that hopefully the Coventry players will get from the crowd will kind of carry them along on a crest of a hugely emotional wave. I talked about Ben Wilson trying to channel his emotions correctly earlier, and that goes for all of his teammates as well. There's an old cliche, isn't there, about you can't win a playoff game after the first leg, but you can go a long way towards losing it, and that is a fear at the back of my mind, is that we end up leaving gaps in behind because we feel the responsibility to try and build a first leg advantage, and Sunderland can pick us off. But yeah, I genuinely think it will be two very, very tight games that ultimately may well go to extra time. I hope I'm wrong. Again, selfishly, I want us obviously to get to Wembley and put right what happened against Luton with the losing on penalties, 2 years ago in the final, probably against Sheffield United, I'd have thought. And I think from our point of view, I think we've got a better chance of beating Sheffield United in a one-off game than we would have of beating them over two legs in the semi-final. So I don't know. I'm not confident or arrogant or anything like that. Far from it. People that know me know that that's the exact opposite of my personality. I'm one of life's born warriors, really, and I am about this tie. But I think it will be, as Nick and you have said earlier, I think that there will be two terrific games, and it's the old adage of may the best team win, really, Chris, to be honest.
Yeah. And Nick, from your point of view, are you expecting Sunderland just to slow the game down as much as possible and keep that tempo and the crowd quiet?
I don't know. For me, the first goal is going to be the important. I think if Sunderland were to score first at Coventry, the dynamic of the tie changes. But if Coventry score first, I do worry about Sunderland's reaction. Not just the fans, the team. I think there is a fear that if Coventry if they score first and early, then I think that might Sunderland that could be. I wouldn't say necessarily fatal, but I think it could have a big bearing on the way that the games go. But I do, and we're all expecting. I think you can't predict, can you? But I mean, I think with Rob, I think there might be it might be cagey on Friday night. I think both teams are well aware that Sunderland's certainly aware that they've, to a certain extent, they have to try not to concede. I think that is and while that doesn't necessarily mean you go 100% defensively, I think it will be on their minds that they have come, hell or high water. They've just not got to try not to concede goals on Friday night. So I'm like Rob. I'm anxious about it. I don't know which way it's going to go, and we've all got theories and so on. But until the whistle blows and they start the game, I just got no idea, and I'm more fearful than I am optimistic, I suppose. But I've always had this quiet confidence that this season Sunderland will do it, and that hasn't gone away. But it doesn't make trying to predict what will happen on Friday night any easier.
No, that's it. And we haven't said it yet, Rob, because you got straight into talking about Jimmy Hill. But congratulations on the birth of your daughter over the last few days.
Thank you very much.
And I'm just wondering, does that mean you're not on duty on Friday?
I'm hoping to get there. I'm not there in an official capacity, I don't think, on Friday. But depending on how things go in the next 48 hours with feeding and one thing and another, I'm still hoping to get to the CBS on Friday. It's a fingers crossed. You're a bit like the game itself, Chris. It's a bit of a fingers crossed job at the moment. So yeah. But thank you very much. That's very kind.
Yeah. See how many brownie points you can pick up over the next few days before the first leg.
If Coventry win, I mean, I'm saying this tongue in cheek. If Coventry win, will you name your daughter after the winning goal scorer?
We've had kind of jokey chats about maybe one of her names being Francesca, or Frankie or something like that. So that is something that me and Mrs. G have talked about, but in a slightly more light-hearted fashion at the moment, Nick. But yeah, we'll see. I do know boys that have been named after all the 1987 FA Cup winning teams. So Stephen, David, Gregory, Lloyd, etc., etc., etc. And that they're very, very tolerant partners for allowing that to happen. Definitely, I don't think that I'd necessarily get away with that. But anyway, we'll see.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, like I said before we started recording, I'm just glad you've ruled Grizovic out as a first name. But that's
yeah.
But and Nick, you were talking about Gary already being in touch with his brother about it. Bit of back and forth.
It was Benno's biggest fear was Coventry because of his brother. Not for what Coventry might do. It's like he just knew he was going. That his narky brother was going to be on the phone, and sure enough, he was on the phone straight away and giving it his all. No doubt, and we'll see him Friday night. He'll be across. Don't you worry. He'll be across. He'll be he'll be wanting to put himself about. So yeah.
Good stuff. Well, it's all set up for a cracker, and let's hope it doesn't come down to a referee's decision or an absolute clanger or something like that. But with my nervous tension starting to build, it's probably a good place to leave it. So on that note, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for your time, Rob, obviously from a car park, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, hospital.
Dragging you away from your daughter.
Yeah, in the hospital car park at the moment, so I go back to make sure that mum and baby are okay. But Chris, pleasure, and Nick, hopefully I'll see you on Friday.
Indeed.
Brilliant.
Yeah, good to talk, Rob.
Thanks.
Congratulations again.
Thank you very much,
Chris, as well.
Yeah. Thanks as always, Nick. Always appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll catch up again, Nick, at some point during the playoffs.
Yeah, brilliant.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
And thanks again, everyone, for listening. If you haven't listened already, we've had Gav talking to Stuart from Coventry fanzine All Things Sky Blue, where he sounded very confident of a trip to Wembley already. So listen back to that for a bit of motivation if you need it. We also talked to David Snowden this week about his new book, A Fistful of Doldrums, so you can listen to that. And as usual, we have all the build-up and reaction around our first leg with Coventry on Friday. So look out in all the usual places for those pods that should be dropping very soon. But from us, bye for now.
podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.